Now, it's been quite a week once again for Tory Sleaze, not just because there's always a good week for Tory Sleaze, it seems at the moment, but because of course, one man called Willie Ragg, or William Ragg, if you like. He's now resigned as a Tory MP, but he's still an MP, so you're still paying his pay packet, I'm afraid, until the next election. But I'm joined now by Peter Barnes, because we thought now would be a good time for a deep dive into some Tory sex scandals. And to be honest, we could do a whole show on this, Peter, for about 4 days, probably.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we haven't got that long.
No,
but let's start off with the, I suppose, the secretive and incredible sort of dark story of the Profumo scandal.
Yeah, really.
Which maybe a lot of people nowadays don't remember.
That's true, because this was long before I was even born.
Yes,
and
even before I was born.
Despite looking like this. But the Profumo affair really, I think, set the benchmark of what a sex scandal really was.
Yes.
You know, obviously it was the Secretary of State John Profumo and Christine Keller. It's been kind of adapted into so many TV shows and things now. But like I said, this one really rocked the establishment because it was seen as, oh, it couldn't happen to one of us kind of situation.
Yes.
And I think that's why it's kind of lingered in our in the culture and the zeitgeist for quite some time.
Right.
And politically, you know, this, like I said, it rocked everything, and we still talk about the Profumo affair now. That's how historic and important it really was.
And the reason it was so important is because Christine Keller was a prostitute, effectively, who was having an affair with John Profumo, who was Secretary of State for War, but she was also having an affair with a Russian spy.
Yes.
So it sort of ticked all the boxes, really.
Yeah, that's true. I always like the quote that they were French were asked at the time, could this ever happen to a French politician? And every French politician's wife presumed they're already having an affair.
Exactly. Exactly. But also, it also conjured up these amazing kind of nights of scandal and sort of debauchery, because they would meet at Cliveden, wouldn't they, which was a stately home just outside of London, and there'd be orgies and there'd be sort of women driven in cars.
It really pulled
MPs,
back this.
you know, sort of political, you know, heavyweights from all sorts of places.
Yeah, and I think it was the idea at the time as well that politicians were seen as some kind of moral leaders as well.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, it all came crashing down. You know, obviously you had the sexual revolution was going on at the time, and that kind of massive social change in Britain.
Loving, And I guess the difference as well between Profumo and all the rest of the people we're about to talk about is that he eventually sort of disappeared literally to do good works, didn't he? Sort of like became Mother Teresa of Calcutta.
I was going to say that it usually happens to the third son in the family. He's going to do good works.
People say Prince Andrew should learn a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's move on to Cecil Parkinson, who was, of course, a big wheel in the Margaret Thatcher cabinet.
Yes, he was.
And she was one of his closest, or he was one of her closest advisors. He ended up having an affair with his secretary and got her pregnant.
Yes, of course, and this one really hit Margaret Thatcher quite hard at the time as well, because they were incredibly close, and I think it was a great loss, I think, for Margaret Thatcher at the time to lose Cecil in the kind of sleazy way that it did. I think this one was seen as more sleazy than scandalous, in the way that it was, you know, having an affair with the secretary, which seemed these days would seem a bit cliche.
Yeah, it would.
But at the time, obviously, Flora Keyes was the child that kind of came out of that relationship. And I think she went on to be a politician in her own right. But it was an interesting one, the Cecil Parkinson, because nobody really saw that one coming, because he was kind of seen as the forthright one, the kind of, you know,
very much a sort of father figure, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's when these scandals happen, particularly to people like that, that's when they hit hard. It's when people, you think, oh, he would do that.
I wasn't expecting that. 1983 that was. Let's fast forward to 1992. David Mellor. There's a name. He now appears, of course, as a pundit, talking about how useless government is.
Yeah.
and I always say, you know what makes me laugh about that is actually he's right, because even though he was part of the John Major government that was sort of all falling apart at the seams, particularly when they went back to basics and they were meant to be all moralistic, he was still a far better politician than anybody we got now.
That's very true. And I always like the story of what one of John Major's chief whips used to say, so which one and what have they done now?
Yes.
Because obviously everybody knows the Major years were dominated by sleaze and scandal. It was one thing after another, after another, after another. And the David Mellor one, yes, I think it was quite early on in the Major years, and I think he did kind of. Oh yes, of course, the What a Rat.
And Antonio de Sancho, who he was said to have made love to in a Chelsea football strip, which of course it turned out that was actually not a real story. It was made up by by the former sort of PR to the Stars, who ended up in prison. His name escapes me for the moment. But let's move on to John Major himself, because this didn't really happen when he was Prime Minister. I don't think.
No,
it
yeah.
came out after he was.
Yeah, so Edwina Curry in 2002 admitted that they'd been having had an affair, but she was very vague on the details as to when this happened.
This was another surprising one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, again, and I think it was because John Major was seen as, he's a decent sort of chap.
Well, he was also really boring.
Yeah, exactly. He was the grey man, wasn't he? Yeah. So, yeah, of course. And again, I think, because this didn't happen whilst he was in office, when it didn't come out at the time, we don't really know how this would have really rocked politics, because we've never really had a prime minister caught up in one of these affairs. It's always been the Secretary of State for such and such thing. So, I would be fascinated to know if a prime minister got wrapped up in one of these scandals, just how the country would react. Because in a way, I'd think some people would go like, oh, who cares? Right. And others, I think, would be like, no, the prime minister shouldn't be doing things like that. It would be interesting to find out.
It made John Major a bit more interesting.
Yes. Well, yeah, the idea of those two together, I'm not going to ruin people's dinner at this time.
No, it's not something you want to think about. Right, now, fast forward to 2021, Matt Hancock, possibly the king of the swingers, if you want to say that, still with the woman that we're about to see. I think we're about to watch it. Here we go. Who can forget? Gina Coladangelo. Yeah. I always used to say it in a sort of Sopranos accent.
Yeah, you do.
It sounds like a Sopranos name. And here he is, 15-year-old, sort of
I was going to say, it's all very like first kiss at a prom thing.
It really is, isn't it? And he's got his hands all over her. It's really quite... it's horrible.
Oh, God, make it stop.
It's just horrible.
Oh, God.
I don't know what he was thinking.
No.
Well, I do know what he was thinking. Yeah. But what I want to know is what happened next. But, I mean, that, of course, is all over the front page of The Sun. Yeah. He ended up having to leave his wife. But worse than that was the way that he did it. Do you remember? Yes. He went home just before the story was about to come out in The Sun, knocked on the door, said to his wife, I'm terribly sorry, darling. There's a story coming out in The Sun tomorrow that says I've been unfaithful to you. I'm just going to go and tell the kids and then I'm off. Yeah. And then he left.
Pretty much, that's what he did.
That was about it.
I think, from what I understand, I think it's his daughter that hasn't spoken to him since.
I'm not surprised.
It's something, I vaguely remember hearing something like that.
Well, children do tend to not be that happy about things like that.
And particularly when it's splashed all over the front pages, I can imagine.
And especially when it's as cringy as that.
I think also with the Matt Hancock one, you have to remember this was right in the middle of lockdown. This was when this was the man that was telling you to stay away from everybody, to not leave your homes, basically, because you might kill grandma. And that's what he was getting up to. And I think this one wasn't really the scandal, it was the hypocrisy. Yes. And I always think the worst thing you could ever be in British public life is a hypocrite.
Exactly right.
Because you can get away with anything, but you're a hypocrite to the British, and the British public will not forgive you.
Now, here's the final one we're going to do. This is more of a sort of Benny Hill style infraccione. This is Neil Parish. Here's a clip here. I think we're going to be able to watch it.
The situation was that funnily enough, it was tractors that I was looking at. And so I did get into another website that had a sort of very similar name. And I watched it for a bit, which I shouldn't have done. But my biggest crime, is that on another occasion, I went in a second time.
And that was deliberately?
And that was deliberate.
I mean, I'm sorry. This is, and I like to think of myself as a fairly well-rounded individual, but I'd never heard of tractor porn until this moment, right?
I'm very far from a prude, but that's a new one on me. But I want to know what's this other website. Like, it sounds familiar. I don't know what that one would be.
Well, so you went back in for a second go.
Yeah. The staggering thing about this story is that the day before, Neil Parish was being interviewed about whoever this was, was supposed to be, and he was pretending like it wasn't him.
One of the strange things about Neil Parish, of course, is that bizarre jacket that he wears. Oh, yeah. I'm not quite sure what that is.
There's many weird things about Neil Parish. Just on that one.
I mean, he, of course, has now resigned, I think, from Parliament.
Yes, he has,
But he was caught basically watching tractor porn. I'm not going to get into what it is.
No.
Look it up if you want. And he was watching it in the chamber of the House of Commons.
Not once, but like he says twice.
If you ever want to do anything like that, don't sit on a bench where there are people behind you who can see what you're looking at. Yeah. That would be my suggestion.
I think that was the thing. When this story first broke, that annoyed me the most was the stupidity of it. Because at least sit on the back row where nobody can look down on you.
Right.
I just don't know what he was thinking. Yeah. Like, but it's staggering. If you look at Parliament now, I think this is the worst behaved Parliament we've had in a very long time.
I think so.
Not just in terms of the sex stuff, but also in terms of just behaviour in general. It just seems to be one thing after another. But it does now seem to be on both sides of the house.
I think we should take a hose to the whole bleeding lot of them.
Oh, God.
Anyway, that was, of course, our deep dive into Tory party sex scandals. We could have done an awful lot more, but I'm afraid we're out of time. We'll be back same time next week with The World According to Mike Graham. We'll see you then. Thank you, Peter.